the buyers, Valhalla! You know why you're here! Welcome! Valhalla, give it up for the Mad Doctor! Adega, Outlaw! Like the fires for Stone Cold Loki! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seven Kinds of Mischief! Yeah, I'm ready to burn some
Okay,
shit
Dang.
down. Greetings, one and all, and welcome to that show you know and love. That show that's spooky and scary and hits you all in the right places. Seven Kinds of Mischief. We are here with the one and only, the Mad Doctor of Disaster and Destruction. He is the author of multiple novels and works. The man's name is Adega, Outlaw. Good evening, sir. How are you doing today?
Good evening. You said it was hitting you in all the right places, and I saw boards posting them going, well, that wasn't the one we were intending.
What is up, Hordes? Good to see you, brother. Good to see you. Lady Mist, what is up, Lady Mist? Lady Mist is in the house. Leia Rose, good evening, Leia Rose. Pat S, what is up, my brother from another mother? How are you doing, Pat? Chris Persia, the Wrench of Wrenches, is here. Good evening, Chris. Sean Estep, what is up, brother? How are you doing? Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Claude Saline is here. What is up, Claude? Good to see you, brother. It is good to see you, and it's good to be on here. Dave G Sound, what is up? Monkey Jeebus, good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. Psychodor 9, right off the bat with the $5 super chat. Listen to y'all. Feeding cats, working the light tray. Keep working, brother. Psychodor 9's been kicking ass and taking names lately, ladies and gentlemen. I can't wait till he starts doing it more publicly. I've been encouraging for a while. Show your work. Show your work. Show us what you're doing.
Yep.
He's getting closer day by day. He is. So what are we doing tonight? I think I've got an idea what I'm gonna do, and Adega's got an idea. I'm not gonna be reading out of Grimm's fairy tales tonight. I'm gonna be doing something a little different. But what do you have for us tonight? Oh, Doctor of Disaster and Destruction, the Mad Doctor of Valhalla.
Well, I've been distracted, and I showed you the distraction earlier. Those of you who have seen that I'm also got books on Barnes and Noble, and you're debating on whether or not you want to go with Amazon or Barnes and Noble, let me briefly tell you the differences besides size. When Barnes and Noble ships a book, they take care. It comes to you pristine. When Amazon ships it to you, oftentimes there'll be some warp pages or covers, but if you put that on a bookshelf in a couple of years, that goes away. So that's neither here nor there. But I'm just impressed with Barnes and Noble. So if you guys have the chance, it may be a little bit smaller, but just the look and feel, I wanted them to be separate from each other, and there's definitely superior. So more is coming out, and that's what I've been putting most of my effort into. But
or you can just buy all of them. You can buy all of them.
No,
Just get them
it's
all.
changing. It's changing. The ones on uh, the hardcovers are almost all gone. I was going to eliminate the last one off of Amazon today, and then I'll start reissuing with the newer, smaller versions. And it doesn't have all of the images that the first ones did. Those are collectors. You guys get to see the development pictures from different projects within it. But the new ones won't have that, but they have the cool fonts and layout. So each one's a little unique. Anyway, um, pastime. What I was doing, I was checking out some research and some of the things that we had talked about this a few years ago about time skips, and I brought some of that up. Maybe I'll do it again, or time skips where people jump through time, but I didn't want to do that. I picked up on something really, really weird. Um, some of you may have heard of this, and I know more of you may have heard of the kingdom of Tartaria. Do you know anything about that, Loki?
No, no. What do we
All
got
right.
here?
Well, I'm not going to get into Tartaria so much. It's a weird theory, and people have some really cool beliefs in this thing. Um, I don't buy it, but it is just fascinating how much they've put into it. And the average person, considering when most people believe what they see on the evening news, they can bite into this Tartaria real easy. And again, the only reason why I don't believe it is because there are so many journals, whether it be family members or other things that show that it didn't happen. But what Tartaria basically is, the belief that about 200, 150 years ago, um, even some say a little bit earlier than that, the world had a different setup, and we're all believing a lie. We've all been trained to believe in multinationalism and all this other stuff. The biggest thing deals with the architecture and old images. It deals with how you can see a lot of these post-Roman, um, almost colonial-looking stone structures. Everything from the Capitol buildings of most states, things that they had at the World Trade Center at the turn of the last century. Uh, it's it's fascinating. They have some of these really old pictures where they'll have the founding age or founding date of a building that is now different from what it is back then. It just it. I'll get into it one of these times. I got a kind of sort of friend. She may be able to help out. She digs into that quite a bit. But when I was going through this stuff, I found something else, and it was done by a German guy, and most people have really dismissed him, but his ideas are kind of sound, and in a strange kind of way, it may be true. Again, I don't believe most of these things right offhand, but it's just fascinating. And when most people write about this stuff, they look at him as a kook. So the author of this article I'm going to read kind of looks, he writes like this guy is a kook. But when you listen to his theories and the way he lays things out, the probability of him being right is 50-50, dead 50-50. The basic premise is we are not in the 21st century. We are in 17th century. Or 18th century. It's 1723, not 2023. Let me go ahead and read some of this for you. It's he put a lot of work into this. Uh, you have to, on both sides of this theory, you have to make suppositions. And so it's whether or not you want to believe in tradition or believe in something that you have to look at things the other way. But here, right or wrong, here it is. And again, this comes from a partial, a bigoted opinion. So it's not going to sound as official as it could. But according to a German historian, Hubert Illig, the year is actually 19, at the time this article was written, it's 1920 or 1720. The Gregorian calendar is a lie, and a chunk of the Middle Ages was completely made up. No, this man is not crazy, at least not officially, and he actually claims to have archaeological evidence to support his case. And I've seen some of this evidence, and it's kind of sound. In 1991, Illig proposed his theory, aptly called phantom time hypothesis. He claims there was a conspiracy entered into back at the 1000 AD to change dating system by three world rulers. Illig claims that the Pope Sylvester II, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, and Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII all got together and changed calendars to make it seem as if Otto had begun his reign in the millennium of 1000 AD rather than 1996 or 996. The reason being is that 1000 sounded a lot more meaningful, and that's what the author of this says, and it's not according to the theory. So you kind of have to dismiss some of this. He's making him sound like a fool. Meaning then 996, considering AD, stands for, it's Anno Domini, or the year of the Lord. Illig further claims that the trio altered existing documents and created fraudulent historical events and people in order to back themselves up. He claims that Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne was not, in fact, a real ruler, except we know he was, but there is some really messed up things about the history of him, but simply a King Arthur type legend. He explains that through all of the tampering and forgery, an extra 297 years were added to history. 297 years that didn't actually happen. Illig says that an inadequate system of dating medieval artifacts, as well as, and I believe that, okay, as well as an over reliance on written history are to blame. According to his research, the years between 614 and 911 AD didn't quite add up. The years prior to 614 were full of historical significant events, as were after 9/11. However, he claims that the ones in between were unusually dull. He also points out that mathematical differences between the Julian and Gregorian calendars further complicate things. The Julian calendars say that the full year is 365.25 days long, whereas the Gregorian calendar that we now use, or the, what does they call it? Oh, I can't remember the other name for it. It says it's actually 11 minutes shorter than the other one. Furthermore, Illig claims that the Roman architecture of the 10th century Western Europe is too modern for the time period in which it was supposedly built. Though this phantom time hypothesis seems far-fetched, Illig has actually managed to find some supporters. Dr. Dan Hans Ulrich Nimitz published a paper in 1995 titled "Did the Early Middle Ages Really Exist?", in which he claims they did not. Between Antiquity AD 1 and the Renaissance of 15 AD, historians account approximately 300 years too many in their chronology, Nimitz wrote. In other words, the Roman Emperor Augustus really lived in 1700 years ago instead of the convention of that's assumed is 2000 years. Some of Nimitz's claims echoed Illig's, such as the discrepancies between the Julian and Gregorian calendars and the lack of reliable historical sources, though Nimitz did admit that counter arguments do exist, as the Byzantine and Islamic regions are at war during this period, which is well documented. Most historians worldwide are critical of this phantom time hypothesis. Something that this article did not get into was, and you can go anywhere in the world that uses our calendar system and look for construction, because in Europe you'll find castle construction, home construction, these village constructions up to 614. And between 614 and the 996, they didn't find anything. There was a list of different civil engineers, castles, various different things that they say were built in the time according to record. But you look them up, they're not there. The entire record that was written several hundred years ago is all fraudulent. It's just bizarre. It's really bizarre. So there you have it. Just an odd philosophy out there that someone's been monkeying with our time. Right now, we miss I think it's every 150 years, we lose 13 years. Because back in the 18, I can't remember, 1812, 1813, you went to bed at like May 4th and you woke up at May 14th. They had to make a accommodation for the 10 days. Yeah, every once in a while, they'll throw in an extra day or two to do that just because our calendar system's off. And that goes into another theory too about how ancient times, we're talking the megalithic times, some of the stuff that you guys know that I study, that uh, some of the research on alternate sources show that Saturn was actually more of a sun-like structure, and it went nova. It caused a lot of things to happen here, why some of the hieroglyphics and different things are represented the way they are. But our years were shorter, and our orbit changed, and it caused the whole calendar system to switch then too, which would in fact cause all of our dating systems, everything, carbon dating, all those different ones, to be off, completely altered, and nowhere near reliable after several thousand years. So there you go. The true question is why. There are several different hypotheses. This one said that he just wanted to be known for the emperor that rushed in the new millennium. But there's a few other reasons why that's on there, and we don't know. We simply don't know. So I'll have to leave it at that. I got someone knock at the door, so I'll be right back.
All right. Thank you, Adega. Adega will be back in just a minute. And we're going to go on with something that's going to take at least a couple of nights to do. Hopefully, it'll just be two because I don't want to leave a big gap. Because 2 weeks from now, we are going to go see um, John Wick 4 in IMAX for Eris's birthday. So hopefully, we can do this in 2 weeks. I'm hoping we can. But this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the man, the myth, the legend, and a little thing called the Whitechapel murders.
All right.
One of the first problems you encounter when you attempt to write a history, the most notorious murderer of all times, is establishing just how many of the Whitechapel murders were in fact carried out by the killer who would be known as Jack the Ripper. Although the exact number of victims most frequently was around 5, it should be remembered that this is based upon a later statement made in 1894 by Melville McNaughton, and this is not by any means a definitive number. The Whitechapel Murders file, which is the generic file that encompasses the actual Jack the Ripper crimes, has the names of 11 victims on it, some of whom were victims of Jack the Ripper, some of whom may have been victims, and several of whom most certainly weren't. The 5 aforementioned names most often put forward and often referred to as the canonical 5 victims as having been murdered by the Ripper are Mary Nichols, who was murdered on the 31st of August in 1888, Annie Chapman on the 8th of September that year, Elizabeth Stride on the 30th of September that year, Catherine Eddowes, murdered on the 30th of September, and Mary Kelly, murdered on the 9th of November, all in the same year of 1888. However, the file also contains the names of 2 victims who were murdered before Mary Nichols, whose body was found on August 31st, 1888. The first of these victims was Emma Smith, who was attacked in the early hours of 3rd April. She later died of injuries in a London hospital, and as a result, hers became the first name to appear on the Whitechapel murder file. Emma Smith was almost certainly not a victim of Jack the Ripper. Indeed, before she died, she was able to tell the doctor who treated her at the London hospital that she had been attacked by a local gang. A few months later, on the 7th of August, the body of Martha Tabram was found in George Yard, a sordid thoroughfare that led, and for the matter still leads, off Whitechapel High Street. She had been subjected to an horrendous and very violent attack, in the course of which she had suffered 39 stab wounds to her throat, chest, and abdomen. Martha Tabram, also referred to as Martha Turner, may or may not have been a victim of the criminal who later became known as Jack the Ripper. The case against her having been a victim is that her throat hadn't been cut and she had not been disemboweled, injuries that almost all the canonical 5 victims later endured. Evidence that suggests she was a victim is that her killer had targeted her throat and abdomen, just as Jack the Ripper would do with the 5 canonical victims. It is therefore safe to say that the jury is most certainly still out on whether or not Martha was a Ripper victim. We move into more certain territory with the murder of Mary Nichols on August 31st of 1888. Again, this was a savage and brutal attack. This time, however, the killer demonstrated the modus operandi of cutting her throat and disemboweling her. Blessed as we are with the gift of hindsight, we can now look back on the murder of Mary Nichols and pinpoint this crime as the start of Jack the Ripper's so-called reign of terror. The police at the time lacked the luxury of such certainty. They certainly connected Mary Nichols' murder with that of Martha Tabram, and many of the officers who worked on the case believed that Martha was indeed the first Jack the Ripper's 6th victim. In addition, they were also, in the early days at least, influenced by Emma Smith's claim that she'd been attacked by a local gang, believing that the crimes were in fact gang related. As a result, it was decided that the investigation needed to be headed by an officer who had a good working knowledge of the East End criminal underworld. Thus, it was that in the early days of September 1888, Inspector Frederick George Aberline, a man who, prior to his promotion out of the area the previous year, had spent the best part of 14 years as a detective in the district where the crimes were occurring, was brought in to take over charge of on-the-ground investigation. Aberline would become one of the most important of the investigating officers, and on the whole, he was able to avoid the general press criticism and ridicule that other more senior officers were subjected to. Indeed, it seems that Aberline was universally respected, not just by his fellow police officers and superiors, but also by the press and the public at large. It was around this time that police inquiries amongst the, how do I put this? I'll just say prostitutes in the area yielded a possible suspect in the form of a man whom local streetwalkers had nicknamed Leather Apron, on account of the fact that he habitually wore a leather apron. According to the prostitutes, this Leather Apron was running an extortion racket amongst them and threatening to rip them open if they did not give him their money. Fortunately, when the press learned of the suspect, several newspapers began emphasizing the man's supposed Hebrew appearance, fact which led to anti-Semitism in the area. It was against this background that on the 8th of September in 1888, the body of another prostitute was discovered in the backyard on 29 Hanbury Street, less than a mile away from Bucks Row, where the previous murder of Mary Nichols had taken place just a week before. The Hanbury Street victim was identified as Annie Chapman, and this time the violence had escalated, with the killer having removed and gone off with a part of her body required to bear children. The fact that a freshly washed leather apron was found close to her body, coupled with the press sensationalism concerning the identity and race of the police's main suspect, caused the anti-Semitism to boil over in a full-scale racial unrest. Desperate to restore order, the authorities flooded the air with police officers, an action which had the effect of both stilling and agitating. Since no murders took place for a few weeks, it appeared to have made it difficult for the killer to strike again. Shortly after the murder of Annie Chapman, Sergeant William Fick arrested local man John Pfizer. What a name. Maintaining that he was known in the area as Leather Apron. Pfizer, however, was able to provide cast iron alibis to his whereabouts at the time of most of the recent murders. He was therefore ruled out as a suspect, and he even appeared at the inquest in Annie Chapman's death, where he was officially and publicly cleared of any involvement in the crimes. On the 10th of September in 1888, a group of local businessmen and tradesmen formed the Mile End Vigilance Committee and elected local builder Mr. George Lusk as their president. In films about Jack the Ripper murders, these committees, there were several in addition to this one, are often depicted as vigilantes. But in reality, their stated aim was to supplement the police numbers in the area and raise sufficient funds to offer a reward for information that might lead to the killer's arrest. As a result of his vigilance committee activities, Mr. George Lusk became something of a local celebrity, and his name began appearing in the newspapers on a regular basis. Meanwhile, at Annie Chapman's request, the divisional police surgeon, Dr. George Baxter Phillips, expressed his opinion that Annie Chapman had been murdered in order that her killer could obtain her womb. Phillips also opined that the skill and speed that he displayed in removing the organ suggested that the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. During his summing up at the inquest into Annie Chapman's death, the coroner, Wynne Baxter, caused a sensation by revealing that the sub-curator of a pathological museum at one of the London medical schools had approached him with information about a certain American doctor who had offered him $20 for each womb he could provide him. Baxter wondered if the knowledge of this demand had incited some deranged wretch to carry out the most recent murder in order to obtain a womb which could presumably then be sold for profit. Needless to say, Baxter's revelations and pondering caused an absolute sensation, and it must be said, added a bizarre twist to what was rapidly becoming the pantomime of the Whitechapel murders. The medical profession itself, it should be said, were quick to disprove Baxter's allegations. And it is interesting to note that such a theory was not mentioned at any of the inquests into the deaths of subsequent victims. On the streets of Whitechapel, the police were battling to bring the killer or killers to justice and were coming in for an awful lot of press criticism for their inability to do so. However, their increased presence appears to have deterred the killer, and by the end of September, people of the area had begun to relax, with many of them believing that the murder spree was over. But on the 30th of September in 1888, the Whitechapel murderer returned and killed 2 women in less than an hour. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride, whose body was found by Louis Demschutz as he turned his pony and cart into a dark yard off of Berner Street at 1 a.m. The fact that her throat had been cut, the rest of her body had not been mutilated, led the police to surmise that the killer had in fact been interrupted by Mr. Demschutz as he entered the yard. The second victim that morning was Catherine Eddowes, whose horrifically mutilated corpse was found in Mitri Square in the city of London at 1:45 a.m. In addition to the injuries suffered by Mary Nichols and Annie Chapman, the killer had also mutilated Catherine Eddowes. He had also removed and gone off with her womb and left kidney. As the police pursued Jack the Ripper through the streets of the East End of London, they discovered a clue. In a doorway in nearby Gulston Street, a police constable, Alfred Long, patrolling his beat, came across a piece of Catherine Eddowes' blood-stained apron in the doorway of an apartment block. Scrawled in chalk on the wall above the apron was a message which read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for anything." This message was a source of a great debate between the Metropolitan Police, who wanted to erase it lest it lead to racial unrest in the district, and the City of London Police, who wanted to photograph it as they felt it might be an important lead in their hunt for the killer, Catherine Eddowes. The descent between the two forces was ended at 5:30 a.m. when Sir Charles Warren, Metropolitan Police Commissioner, arrived at the scene and ordered its immediate erasure. In the wake of what the press dubbed the double event, the police decided to make a public letter, which a few days previous had been sent to a London news agency. Written in red ink, it purported to have been written by the killer himself and boasted that the police won't fix me yet, having gloated over what he had done to his supposed victims and stating that he would do this again to his next victim. The authors signed the letter Jack the Ripper. Once the police made the letter public, the name Jack the Ripper caught on immediately and helped turn a series of sordid East End murders into an international phenomenon. Indeed, it is safe to say that part of the reason why this particular set of crimes are still so famous is because of the name. Unfortunately, releasing the letter proved to be a mistake. The police quickly deduced that it hadn't been written by the killer, but rather was the work of a London journalist. However, such was the allure of the name, hoaxers began sending in letters with the same or similar signatures. The police investigation came close to melt down with this veritable avalanche of Jack the Ripper correspondence. One of the most famous of these pranks was sent by George Lusk, the president of the Mile End Vigilance Club, in mid-October of 1888. Famously, this letter was addressed from hell, and it contained half a kidney, which, according to the letter's writer, he took from one of the victims. Despite lurid press speculation that the kidney sent to Mr. Lusk was indeed half of the one taken from the body of Catherine Eddowes, the consensus amongst the police and doctors was that it was in fact a sick prank perpetrated by a medical student. However, the whole of October went by without another murder, and once more, the people of the area entered November believing that the spree was over. Their relief, however, was premature. On the 9th of November, 1888, the body of Mary Kelly was found in her room at 13 Mills Court off Dorset Street in Spitalfields. Her body had been virtually skinned down to the bone. Indeed, so extensive and horrific were her mutilations that her live-in lover, Joseph Barnett, was only able to identify her by her eyes and ears. Although it is generally believed that Mary Kelly was the last of Jack the Ripper's victims, there are several more names of latter murder victims on the Whitechapel murders file. On the 20th of December, in 1888, Rose Millett was found dead, but unmutilated, in Clark's Yard. Popular, although the newspapers were full of speculation that she'd been murdered by Jack the Ripper, the police doctors concluded that her death had been accidental. However, the coroner and the jury at her subsequent inquest disagreed, and a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown was returned. On the 17th of July, in 1889, the body of Alice Mackenzie was found in Castle Alley off Whitechapel High Street. There were 2 stab wounds in her throat, and a long, though not unduly deep wound ran from her left breast to her navel. In addition, there were also shallow wounds and scratches to her lower abdomen. Although at the time, some police officers and doctors believed that Jack the Ripper had returned, the general consensus was, and still is amongst experts, that she was not a victim of Jack the Ripper. On the 10th of September in 1889, mutilated torso of an unidentified woman was found on a railway arch in Pinchin Street, a little way from Commercial Road, in a short distance from Berner Street, where Elizabeth Stride had been murdered almost 1 year before. Press reports at the time mentioned similarities to the mutilations to the torso and injuries sustained by Jack the Ripper's victims. But the then Metropolitan Police Commissioner, James Monroe, considered the modus operandi to be different to that of Ripper and ruled the woman out as one of his victims. The final name to appear on the Whitechapel murders file is that of Frances Coles, whose body was found at 2:20 a.m. on the 13th of February in 1891 in Swallow Gardens off Mansell Street, not far from the Tower of London. Her throat had been cut, but she had not sustained any further mutilations. The fact that she was still alive when found by Police Constable Ernest Thomas led to the speculation that the killer, as in the case of Elizabeth Stride, had been interrupted. When it transpired that she had spent the days prior to her death with a sailor by the name of Thomas Sadler, that he had not only been involved in several drunken altercations around the time of her murder, but he also sold a clasp knife shortly after her murder. The police arrested him and considered him a likely suspect, not only in the murder of Frances Coles, but also for the other murders. However, the case against him soon collapsed and Sadler was cleared of any involvement and released. With the murder of Frances Coles by person or persons unknown, Whitechapel murders came to an end, and shortly afterwards, the file was closed. And that is a quick overview of the Whitechapel murders and Jack the Ripper. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we will go into detail on the suspects that came across the desks of the police during the terror that was the East End murders.
I have my belief, but we'll save that for next week.
Royalty?
Maybe this brought up something kind of associated. Lady Miss brought up something, and then the Hillen 29 brought something up. I never thought of that.
That is very possible. That is very, very possible. I never thought of that either. It's brilliant.
Well, in most societies, they don't consider women being capable of doing that, but we know that mass murder is completely within the realm and has been done over and over again by women.
Luis says, I've done one of the Jack the Ripper walks where they take you around the area where all the murders happened. I would love to do that. I didn't get to do that when I was there. So that would be absolutely awesome. I would love to do that. If I ever go back, I will definitely do that.
Yeah, you'll make it back one of these years.
Who else did you say said something besides
it was he pretty much said the same thing. Sorry, there's an accident on the freeway. That's the only time you hear the sirens going on.
You're fine.
To Hillam 29, it's at 7:37. And wouldn't that be interesting if Jack the Ripper was actually a woman? I'm gonna mute. They're getting loud.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. That would be groundbreaking.
But one of our first shows when we started doing the macabre stuff, I brought up, and I can't remember her name. I always forget it. But she was that Duchess in Europe, who estimates go anywhere from 12 to 300 girls, where she slaughtered them. They figured she was one of the origins of vampires from modern era. She had slaughtered them to bathe or drink in her blood, thinking it was bringing immortality, until the people clamored enough. They got the rest of the royalty, and they locked her up in a tower and didn't feed her, and she starved to death.
Phantom Outsider says, in all seriousness, there was a murder on the outskirts of the royal family who went to med college and was eventually committed to an asylum. I've heard about the royalty theory, that it was a member of the royal family, and that's why he got away with it. Black Dahlia, we've done that. We've talked about that before. It was one of those last minute.
A few months ago.
Yeah, so that was an off the cuff talk too, because I hadn't planned this. This was like a last minute thing. I was like, you know what, I want to talk about let's talk about a unsolved
Get out of the
mystery
storybook for a little bit.
Yeah, the greatest unsolved mystery of all time. Who was Jack the Ripper?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd say murder mystery. There's some other mysteries that are pretty.
Saj Melody blames Prince Andrew. I can see that.
Don't get me started on European royalties. Oh my word.
We just want to be left alone. We want our privacy.
Privacy. I like the very end of that episode where he looks down at the road like, hello? There's nothing inside.
Empty. It's empty. Canadian people. Oh my God. Yes. Okay. For any of you don't know what we're talking about, go watch the South Park episode. We want our privacy. We demand privacy. We're gonna shoot off fireworks and play drums in our front yard and even polo, but we want our privacy, damn it. We demand privacy.
So accurate.
In the Lost World, they played with the theory that it was three men working together. One was played by John Noble.
I'll give you my theories when Loki brings up the different ones next week. But I'm sure all of us have our little secrets and
Theories.
thoughts and theories about what they believe happened, you know. And then again, no one knows. So all of them are valid.
Yes, Chris starts playing drums and shooting fireworks. We demand our privacy, damn it. Yes. What if a man that thought it was all right to murder women stalked a female that was a psychopath and had noticed her stalker and was happy for her next victim? That's it. Okay.
You know, she's
So
dark. I worry about you, Lady Mist. Guardian of the Void. You spend too much time in the void.
if it's a royal, which I honestly believe it was, oh no, the humanity. Because you've got a couple that, yeah. Taking the womb, clearing up his evidence. You've got and I think whoever it was. And see, there's this thing. There's this thing I heard about, this crazy thing where the respectable British families, you weren't allowed to go out cavorting. You weren't allowed to go out and, I'll just say it, go out whoring. These things were not allowed. These were not acceptable things. You waited until you were married and you got hitched up, and then that's all you ever did for the rest of your life. There was no caterwauling or doing anything like that at all. If this was a repressed individual, which I believe they were, and especially if it was, let's say, a close family member that continued to insist that he would be ruined by his horribly manly ways and unclean ways, he's got to clean up the evidence. And all of them were streetwalkers. Had to clean up his evidence. Had to get rid of the evidence. What's it, Abby? Abbott guy? The Abbott guy? You had the help bring you the horse. Don't die in the next 2 minutes by a stalker. No, I won't. I have a very, very saucy, pissed off captain in the other room that wouldn't be so happy about that. So I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
So I don't
I
think
could only
so.
imagine the violence.
And I don't think so. I think to other people, he would have been a straight up beta. He would be a beta male that a yes man that was constantly, oh yes, yes, mother, yes, wife, if he had a wife. He was a constant yes man who felt completely no respect. He didn't feel any respect by the whoever he was with, whether it was his mother, whether it was his wife, if he had a wife, girlfriend, whoever it was. He was a disappointment. He got treated like crap, and this was his way of dealing with all of that. So I don't think it was a toxic alpha male at all. I think it was a wimpy little beta male that was a yes man, like Adega said. And this was his way of dealing with that and getting out all his anger and oppression and pent up frustrations. And then he had to clean up the evidence because he couldn't get caught, could he? Couldn't have anybody talking, telling him who he was. They might say something. So I'll just, deliver my little package and then hide the evidence. So
Yeah.
I'm surprised
The
they
world that
didn't
will
think
never
about that.
know.
No, no, not unless, not unless someone knows something and has been keeping it under wraps all this time.
I've seen it a couple times in chat. It's the Vorlons they know. You haven't watched Babylon 5 yet, so.
No, but I do know the Vorgons, the Vogon poetry, the Vogon.
Don't even start. We'll all go to sleep. Or kill ourselves of boredom.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. I want some fish. Dun, 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 dun. So long, so long, so long, and thanks for all the fish. We're out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Take care. Be excellent to each other. Always speak, friend, enter. We'll be back. So long. Thanks for all the fish.
Mark.
What you talking about, Willis?
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.